Well, we are going to introduce with a very loud clap to Tony Lauro.
Thank you, everyone. I feel like a motivational speaker up here. I'm going to start today. So my name is Tony Lauro. I'm Director of Security Strategy at Akamai. I've been at Akamai for about 10 years, but I've been in InfoSec since the late 90s. And what's interesting is every job I've worked for, I'm securing systems, I'm going through audits, I'm doing whatever, and you're kind of like waiting to be hacked. You're waiting for the big event to happen. But it doesn't always happen, right? Not every company you work for gets hacked. But when I came to Akamai 10 years ago, we're sitting in front of the world's largest banks, social media networks. If you watch the FIFA World Cup streaming or the Sochi Olympics, that's all streaming through Akamai. So we're seeing major attacks all the time. And that has really allowed me to get a really interesting insight of what's happening on the internet. What's bad? What are we kind of told is bad, but it's not really happening that much? So I thought it would be cool to compile a list of some of the cool things that I've seen, but I want to make a disclaimer. So the first disclaimer, let me first give you guys a little background about myself. I'm come from Dallas, Texas, so the flight was beautiful, direct, very nice. And I've got a family there. I grew up wrestling and skateboarding, doing Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. So if you need physical security, I can also help you with that. So just if anyone feels unsafe, you just let me know. And this is my Twitter handle. My handle that I got in the late 90s is Wu Ming, which interestingly enough, it means anonymous in Chinese. So I was anonymous before anonymous was anonymous. I'm not sure that's that cool or not. And this picture, I don't know, I might have to change that. My head is huge. So a little bit about Akamai. We just hit a high watermark, a traffic watermark. So you guys might know Akamai as a CDN network. So we deliver content and secure content for all these big organizations I told you about. We recently reached a high watermark of 250 terabits per second. So we're an overlay on top of the internet to make the internet faster and more reliable and more secure. So I was like, 250 terabits per second, what does that look like? So we did a little infographic, and the infographic looks like this. It says, if you wanted to watch or download every movie that's ever been made, you could do that, every movie that's ever been made, every feature-length movie, which means 50 minutes and above. You could download every movie in 37 seconds. That's the throughput on the platform, and just in one single day, one high watermark. As an engineer, I said, this is BS. Let me look into it. So I went to IMDb, and it says there's 500,000 feature-length films. They're roughly about 4 gigabytes in size. And then that did check out, 37 seconds. If you wanted to watch those movies, it would take 51 years of continuous viewing. So how much time you got? So we're going to talk about really cool hacking, right? And everyone thinks that hacking looks like this. This guy's hacking Quantico. I think he hacks the Statue of Liberty. I'm not sure how that works. But this is what people perceive hacking as. And some of it is. Some of it's super sexy. You show up and you're like, you rubber ducky into the computer as you're walking to the bathroom at the bank. That's awesome. But the hacking I'm going to be talking about is pretty interesting because it happens where there's no chance for you to turn off the attack or turn off the website, or in this case, cut the hard lines. So this, you guys have probably seen cut the hard lines. I'm going to have to click on this.
Cut the hard lines! I need a key!
So basically, you have these cases where it's like, hey, something really bad is happening, cut the hard lines. But you can't turn off Facebook. You can't turn off Amazon.com. You can't turn off, the biggest banks in the world. You could, but it probably would not end well for somebody. So the attacks we're going to talk about today are really interesting because they're happening under the guise of, I want this to look like normal user traffic. And as an attacker, if I can make my traffic blend in, that's all the better for me, right? So we'll go into a couple examples here. I've roughly themed this with Wu-Tang references and cat kung fu fighting. So if you don't like cats, that's not my fault. But we're going to talk about the 5 common obfuscation techniques that we've seen in the wild. All right, you guys with me? All right, let's enter the Fu-Tang. The 5 chambers of the Fu-Tang. The first example, this is impersonation technique. And again, these are loosely coined. Impersonation technique, this happens a lot with bot traffic, right? So Googlebot, for instance. Googlebot wants to peruse the internet. You as a site owner, you're going to allow Googlebot to come into your site. And if you see the Googlebot header, the user agent, and maybe you're doing some other identifiers, you're going to say, okay, this is Googlebot. I'm going to get access, give access to this bot so that I don't negatively affect SEO, so I keep the site performance going, etc. So attackers have found out that, hey, I can use Google Sheets, the Excel of Google, and I can start scripting requests. I can script requests that come from Google Sheets and go into a trusted website that probably shouldn't let me index the entire website and search it. But if I can make the request look enough like Googlebot, then maybe that website will let me. So you as a defender, you're going to ask yourself this question: is this Googlebot, right? And there's a couple, finite ways to be able to tell if this is Googlebot. So one is to look at the user agent itself. Very easy to spoof all of this, obviously, but full user agent string, that is kept up to date. And there's an index that's sent out that says this is the latest Googlebot revision. And then the AS number and the domain being sent with it. So you can see here that it's Google and the AS number. So that checks out, right? Let's see what this impersonator bot looks like. Okay, you're coming in, you've got Googlebot, user agent, full user agent string is correct, AS number is correct, but the domain is Google user content. That's a little bit different. Let's keep going. Let's look at the domain and then also the CIDR block assigned to Google user content. Although it's owned by Google, it's not owned by Googlebot. It's not, meant for that. So you would have to say that we're going to invalidate this. In many cases, people are desperate for SEO numbers and for good response from the search engines. So they whitelist these search bots very poorly. So if you were to kind of break this down and look at the whois info, it says this IP address and org ID are used by Google Cloud customers. Why would you allow Google Cloud customers to index your site? This is a very simple example. There's also a lot of how-tos, right? If you want to run a script, you want to make it look like Googlebot, here's how you do it. Now, where could this negatively come into play? Here's a customer of ours that was on Amazon, but using Akamai on the front end to provide CDN services, and they got hit with a get flood request. And what does your CDN or your cloud WAF provider do? They're going to either serve the responses on your behalf, or they're going to block the traffic. In this particular case, we served the responses. It drove the user's monthly billing up by 1,000%. This is called a leaky faucet attack, where if you're using any cloud service, as an attacker, I can look at the meter, so to speak, of how you're being charged, and I can specifically attack your cloud provider to financially run your numbers up for that month. So in this particular case, if there's any type of overage that's caused by an attack, we actually absorb that cost within our company and don't charge it to the customer. So I thought that was rather nice of us. Example 2, trusted site technique. So this is something that comes up quite a bit. We'll look at an example here from raw.githubusercontent.com. And you'll see highlighted in yellow is the path to this file, BP scan. And then circled in or squared up here in red is the part of the website that has a remote file inclusion vulnerability in it. So it looks like it's WordPress plugin, and it's a resize form. It's a resize PHP form. And then it says source equals, and that usually is source equals the location of the file you just uploaded, or maybe the location of the file you're uploading, or even if it's on the fly, it's going to upload, it's going to do that telemetry from a site that exists on the internet. But if there's no validation of where you're calling out to, now you have remote file inclusion vulnerability coupled with the ability to have the web server execute bpscan.php, which, if you know, bpscan is a reverse shell script. So once the web server executes this, based on the configuration of the attacker, it's going to open up either an open port or it's going to call back to a specific location. So why would someone get away with this, right? In the terms of mass exploitation campaigns, what I found interesting is if I'm an attacker, and here's where it gets less sexy and more like the law of large numbers. If I'm sending 100,000 phishing emails with a payload link or malware with a payload link to a malware file, I don't want those requests coming back to my server under my desk at home. I don't want it going to DigitalOcean or Amazon where, you know, I'm paying for all this. I'm going to put it onto a CDN or a site that has CDN for a few reasons. So why would we execute this file directly from GitHub? And why does this work? So one, the attacker doesn't need to manage multiple copies of this file, right? So if this is just a shell and it's going to listen on a certain port, or maybe it's going to respond to a certain type of request when you send it in the HTTP header, I don't have to keep any infrastructure in the game. Two, there's little chance that any reputation service, URL blocking, anything like that is going to blacklist GitHub's domain. Three, this makes it difficult to audit via system logs. If you don't know that this has happened and you're going through, and in an environment that already has GitHub being used quite a bit, this probably wouldn't show up as anything peculiar, unless, of course, you're looking for the types of files that are being executed. And lastly, this allows for potential use of GitHub's CDN services to utilize acceleration. Here's where it gets funny. Akamai sits in front of GitHub, and a few years ago, they got hit with one of the largest DDoS attacks in history. 1.3 terabits per second of attack traffic. It looked like this coming into our SOC. This was an Mcached reflection attack. If you guys are familiar with the service Mcached, the attackers were basically leveraging these responders to basically trick all of them into sending requests back to the target domain, which was GitHub. So if you've ever dealt with DDoS, you're probably like, you know, hey, well, you know, once we start seeing it, then we can kind of work the magic, right? This came in within within 60 seconds, it was at full capacity. So if you're at home and you're remoting in and you're trying to like configure a device, you wouldn't be able to connect. So that's a big problem. All right, example 3. We're going to call this human ingenuity technique. Look at this little dumb cat. How cute. I'm not even sure how that happened, but actually the truth is I don't even like cats at all. Like, I'm allergic to cats. I think there might be a cat here because my nose is stuffed up. But this is probably the most adorable picture of a cat I've ever seen. So I had to put it in here. All right, let's talk about bots. Has anyone ever used a bot? Okay, protecting yourselves from guilty conscience there. Has anyone ever wanted to buy a pair of shoes or something and then found out that it's sold out in like 0.5 seconds? Okay, all right. So every time I try to buy a pair of shoes or anything that's limited, PS5, which my wife's like, why would you possibly need another gaming system? That's not the point. I say this to my wife, very gently, of course. But bots are used to make purchases in an automated manner. And there's a new breed of bot, which is called a human-controlled bot. So instead of scripting everything and kind of sending it off into the wind to do its bidding, in this particular case, AIO bots have users controlling the back end. So let's look at a couple examples. This is called CyberSoul. This is a bot. It retails for $300. They sell limited licenses because they're trying to kind of protect their infrastructure and their usage. But on the aftermarket, it sells for like $2,000 to $5,000. And it's typically targeting shoes, games, apparel. If you've ever tried to buy a new game release that comes out, this is where the attackers are headed. On the back end, they have a ton of services. You can call up for tech support. In their config docs, they say, oh, hey, here's the mobile API to hit because it's much less protected than the store front end. So hit this one. Keep your requests under these rate controls. They're very, this website is very strict about rate controls for this part of the site. They share all this information, which is awesome. In the hacking community, sharing is like caring. But when you're attacking a business, it becomes a little bit bigger of a problem. So a couple of the IOCs that you can tell if this is running. Now, typically, this wouldn't be running in your environment, but I just pulled this up anyway. It's making callouts to this redgate.com, which is not like an attack website. And you see it uploads a report, login information, and reporting information. And that's hosted on Amazon. So for this software to work, it has to communicate to Amazon. So maybe Amazon could do some protection here and say, hey, if there's services that are being used illegally, to my knowledge in the United States, only the state of California has it illegal to use automated bots to buy goods. Everywhere else, it's just considered like, I'm smarter than you, So this is Redgate. Another bot is called Dashi. Dashi is specifically made for any website that's on the Shopify platform. You guys know Shopify? Shopify platform, very popular. Dashi, also very popular. And we'll go into one particular service I thought was cool. It's this quick CAPTCHA solver. And Dashi's got 45,000 followers. And when you're inside of the Dashi configuration, there's a drop down for what store you want to attack. So these options are pre-configured. They're part of all the supported stores that Shopify has listed. But you can select checkout proxies, so you can make sure you're proxying your traffic through home IP addresses, right? Because if I'm buying product from Amazon, as a defender, it's very easy to say, yeah, this is probably not good user traffic if it's coming from a cloud hosting provider. So all the traffic is proxied through home IP addresses. Different username and password configurations. So this is when you talk about account takeover and the whole process of basically identifying, is the username and password that Tony used on LinkedIn when they had their big data breach, does that work on some of these Shopify sites? This is after that. This is after they've already validated credentials. They're going to use them, or in many cases, they're just creating new accounts. So new account creation and all the techniques to prevent that being done by bots is also very important. But this process makes it so much easier for the attacker. And the last piece is the monitoring piece. This allows you to monitor the responses. So if you guys have ever used Burp Suite and you're using the scanner to interact with the site, you're basically monitoring for, you're getting all these 404s, you're getting all these different response codes. Once you get a 200 response okay with the word that says successful login, now you know whatever you did worked, right? Again, not as sexy as actually knowing exactly how it worked, but still very cool. So this is what the interface looks like. You have all these different profiles. There's also different payment profiles. So if one of your payment cards fails, you can inject the other one. And here's the cool thing. So it has this little CAPTCHA window in the bottom. You bring it up and it says open YouTube. So you open up YouTube. You have to log in first, right? So you log in with Google. And then there's a little checkbox that says I'm not a robot. But then you get this CAPTCHA to solve, right? And you have these 4 boxes here. This is where the sign is, right? So you select those and you're like, wait a minute, there's a little bit of a sign there. Do I click that or not, right? And this is the moment where you're like, how good is this CAPTCHA? So anyway, you click through, and now you get logged in. Once you're logged into YouTube and you start watching videos, you get what's called user liveliness tokens. And it basically tells the Google CAPTCHA service that you're a real user with life, right? Like you're actually engaging with the platform. So I've seen this, done screen captures of, don't ask me how I did this, screen captures of attackers using these bots, and they've got all these pop-ups, all these CAPTCHA responses from their sessions. They just click, I'm not a robot, instead of having to solve a CAPTCHA. So if you wonder, oh, well, we'll just turn on CAPTCHA and block the attack. It doesn't necessarily work that way. There's also a lot of, infighting in these groups. Hey, I'm creating this cool tool, I'm selling it, but you pay me and then I never pay you back, or I never give you the product. That's a big problem as well. So sometimes it's fun to see the scammers get scammed themselves. Example 4. Do you guys remember this meme where the cat's walking, then it jumps and to its death? It's kind of sad, but also funny. This is called shot in the dark technique. So this was an interesting case where an attacker tried to phish one of our security researchers. And the security researcher's name is Larry O on Twitter. His real name is Larry Cash Dollar, which is such an awesome name. But he gets this email. And then he's like, okay, something looks fishy, right? Can you spot it? Well, the email address is from Facebook_secure@hotmail.com. Like, this guy was really confused, whoever sent this. But, if you were to get this email, you would probably most definitely see, if you're on a desktop browser, you would see that and be like, this is BS, right? But there's a couple of social engineering techniques that are in play here, even before talking to anyone. Pretexting, and pretexting is, this looks legitimate. It looks like it's coming from Google. There's some kind of trust factor here. And then baiting. Baiting is, hey, there's something wrong with your account, or hey, quick, the deal expires at midnight, whatever's going to get you to click on it. So if you happen to click on that, and this is my kitchen table at home, it may not look so strange to click through and then see this on your mobile browser, right? And maybe you see a little bit of weird stuff up here, but if you scroll up, it looks just like a Gmail login. So this is what happens. We had Larry get this phishing email. He clicked through and he noticed something interesting, that it was actually, even though there was the green lock and it said google.com, sorry, that was loud. He noticed that it was going through Google Translate. So what the attacker was doing was taking his fake phishing page, putting it through Google Translate, so that when you look from a certificate services perspective on the front end, you're communicating with Google. You really are. But the whole back-end phishing page exists at a different URL, this mediacity.co. I thought this was a really interesting attack vector, mainly because there's so many bad phishing pages. In fact, after you click through and log into Gmail here, it pulls up this really crappy login to Facebook login page, which does not look as cool or sexy. So if you were to enter your information into both of these, this is what would happen. So this is the script that's allowing this to happen. The scammer's email address where all this gets sent to is up here. Here's what's happening. The scammer's name and tag, and then the credentials that get forwarded end up, if you just do a mail catcher, end up looking like this. So you have email address, password, phone number if that's in a form field, and then alternate email if that's also there. Also, I thought it was interesting, you get the user agent of the actual device the user was connecting from. So if you're going to go forward and do man in the middle or do any kind of attack vector, you can look just like that user, or you can try to get as close as possible. So I thought that was really interesting. And I wanted to break it down even further, because after you click through this, you see this Google user content. And this is kind of that trusted site problem that we talked about before. Because Google user content is owned by Google. There may be a trust relationship with Google, but user content means users have submitted this data. So I went to Google translate.google user content because it's different from translate.google.com, which other tools might use. And I said, let me look at some of the top hits here. So we had this file hash. This was uploaded to Alien Vault. And I was like, for giggles, let me just dig into this. So I dug in. It turns out it's this, this translation tool. Looks legit. If you install this, what is this translation tool going to do? So I broke down exactly what's happening, and it looks like, okay, medium risk, but ICMP, okay, maybe it's doing a liveliness check. Anti-VM generic BIOS. That's interesting. Why would this tool have to look for anti-VM or VMware instructions? Network HTTP dumped buffer. There's a lot of things that this tool is doing that probably doesn't need to do. I'm not saying this is bad. Whoever wrote this, if you're in the audience, I don't want to call you out. But those items are definitely listed as high severity in terms of the risk they might represent if this tool that you allowed to actually be installed is able to carry out its bidding. All right, final battle technique. Here's the part where Neo has to stop the bullets with just his mind, which is so cool. Did anybody like almost faint watching The Matrix for the first time? Just like crying? So like cyber awesome? I did. And seeing this actually is scaring me a bit. PHP obfuscation. This is something, this is not new. There's a lot of free online encoding tools. But the idea here is, again, I don't want to trigger WAF rules. I don't want to trigger application, regex or anything that might look like an attack. But if I can use multiple levels of encoding or doing the right encoding in areas where maybe your WAF is not breaking that down, maybe I can get an attack through. So we see this quite a bit. Here's an example of an RFI payload being obscured, all of this here. And the payload is using custom PHP functions to carry out a very specific task. And I thought this was quite interesting. This is what it looks like. If you break down and see exactly what's happening, you'll see this. So you see this function is bot agents, and then you have these different agent names, a lot of them. And then basically what you're looking at here is what happens when a user agent that hits this page that I'm injecting this code into, what happens when one of those user agents hits this page. In this particular case, the attacker, not saying it was a competitor of this company, but when big corporations spend money, all the eyeballs come to those pages, right? If you're watching the FIFA World Cup and there's a commercial for Ford, a new Ford car, everybody goes to the Ford website, right? Attackers use those moments and vulnerabilities in these websites to basically take advantage of these large numbers. In this particular case, I'm going to drink a little bit of water in just a moment here. In this particular case, the RFI payload, after injected into index.php, it modifies the Joomla code to inject this code. And basically, any time that a bot comes to the page, it redirects it to this page here. And if you actually look in what this actually is doing, this is like an adult content website. So here you have a very popular news site, for instance, and every time a bot hits that news site, it pulls up this adult content website. That's probably embarrassing one. If you like search for, New York Times and a porn website comes up in the search results, probably not a good look. But what's interesting here is this dramatically lowers your SEO results. So if I'm a competitor, it doesn't matter where I send you. If I'm giving you content that you're not expecting as a bot from my site, I could destroy your online presence. So this attack has been used for SEO poisoning. We've seen it in a couple other different ways as well. not this particular attack, but the idea of obfuscating code. So if I'm an attacker and I know that you're using third or fourth party plugins, what I want to do is you might have great security, but those third and fourth party plugins and the JavaScript that they represent loads as part of your trusted page load, right? So in the case of Maintrack, if you guys remember Maintrack, it was a group of about 5 or 6 loose collective groups that were all attacking major banks in the United States and in Canada. And they basically would take this JavaScript that's being loaded from a third or fourth party and manipulate it. And now that that's being loaded, you as a client of this bank, your browser is now interacting with this web page, that everything that loads, you know, if you look at a waterfall, everything that loads, it's trusting that content. Like that's the relationship, right? You've got your little lock, it's the right website, not a phishing site, not a scam site. But as this content loads, it's actually manipulating your browser view of the website. So for instance, you could do page skimming. So as someone's typing in a username and password or credit card information, that JavaScript is extracting that from your browser session and sending it off to someone else. This is how Maintrack functioned. You know, and I asked myself, listen, this same vulnerability exists still today, where you have third and fourth party code. If you're to look at a spider chart of what your website calls out to, it's insane. There's so many different resources on the internet. Some of those you have direct relationships to, but many of those are like connected via all these different spider fingers. So why not inject more malicious code, like ransomware? We already saw an attack at the beginning of last year where an actual ransomware droplet was installed via the same Maintrack technique. This is something that's still emerging. Out of interest, I'm thinking to myself, well, there's certain malware that does, they've got several different modules. One of them is called Ghost DNS, where if this malware executes, it scans your internal network, it looks for your home router, it tries to execute default credentials that it has for a bunch of these common home routers, and then it changes your recursive DNS settings. So every request now that goes through the internet is going through a recursive resolver that the attacker owns, and they can manipulate. So if you go to Facebook, boom, you get a perfectly positioned phishing copy of Facebook. If you go to your bank, it gives you that, right? I think that's where this is going. I don't totally know for sure, but again, these are things that are kind of evolving. So that's a little bit about what we've seen. There's a lot of really cool stuff. I have some resources here, our security research group, some blogs about that, and Akamai is always hiring, and that is it. I hope you guys enjoyed this. I hope it was entertaining, and I will open it up for questions now.
Well, if someone has any question, you can or raise your hand or pass to the middle to that microphone.
And that's okay. I mean, I didn't really leave much room for questions because everything was kind of explained. But oh, have I been up on the screen like that this whole time? That's scary. No. All right. I will be around. Thank you guys for being here. I really appreciate it. Talk to you later.
Está llegando.